Okay, hello everybody. Well, I'm going to start with giving oil my lamp to get those juices flowing, get some energy.
Juices flowing?
I cast all my cares upon you. Huh?
Test. Is anything going through?
It's like
Very
really.
little? Okay. Okay.
That one's the better one. Cast all my cares upon
La. Hold on, whoa, it's a bit loud. Cast all my cares upon you. I lay all my burdens down at your feet. At any time I don't know what to do. I will cast all my cares upon you. I cast all my cares upon you. everyone to stand for our theme song now. People we have gathered here. Thank you for the week we've had and the friends we've made and the time we've gotten to spend with you. I pray you be with us now, this evening, and keep the mosquitoes away. Amen.
So yeah, John, this seems to be good. It's a little loud. All right, so I have 2 questions tonight. So the first one is this. In last night's story with Mr. Wong, why did the guard hit Mr. Wong across the head with his rifle?
He was too slow.
He was too slow. Awesome.
Better share. Huh? Smarties. Is that you share?
Oh, you can share. You're actually going to share? All right, next question. Or whatever it is, I'm not really sure. Name the name of the prophet that we studied about last night. Who was the prophet that we studied about last night? He was in the pit. The prophet in the pit. You, yeah. Jeremiah, awesome, okay. You? Yes, you. See if I can get some of these out. Jeremiah. I think you got two, but that's all good. I'll see that too. Okay, let's just close our eyes and we'll start off with a word of prayer. Father in heaven, I just want to thank you that we have this opportunity to come together again this evening. And I just pray, Lord, that again as we dive into your word, that you would reveal more about who you are and why we should be fully committed to you. I ask this in your name. Amen. Okay, so we left Mr. Wong having just discovered that the guard that was nice to him was actually familiar with Christianity because his grandmother had also been a Christian. And so as long as that officer was there, everything was going good. And that is until Officer Yen arrived at camp. Now, up until this point, Mr. Wong hadn't had any problems with Sabbaths either. He'd actually been granted Sabbaths off. And so when Officer Yen came to the camp, roll call was happening, and as he's taking roll call, he gets to Mr. Wong's name and he goes, "Mr. Wong? Prisoner Wong." And there's no response. Sabbath morning. And he goes, "Prisoner Wong." And there's still no response. So he goes through again and he goes, where's Prisoner Wong? And one of the individuals stands up and says, "You'll find Prisoner Wong on his bedroll." So he goes down and he finds Prisoner Wong sitting on the ground on his bedroll, reading from his medical encyclopedia, where he would put the pages of scripture. And he says to him, "Prisoner Wong, why are you not working?" And he explains, "Well, you see, in the past I've been given the day off so that I can worship with my friend." And he says, "I want you to go to work and I want you to go now." And he responds with, "Well, sir, no disrespect, but my friend gave me this day, this Sabbath day, as a special day to spend with him. And I would like it if you could grant it off as well." Officer Yen calls 6 other prisoners in. He commands 2 of them to hold Mr. Wong. And he commands the other 4 to begin beating him. And they begin punching him with their fists. They begin kicking him. And he's held between these 2 like this. He can't move. And then he stops the beatings and he says, "Prisoner Wong, are you going to go to work now?" And he says, "I can't go to work." And he says, "You've been sent here because you refused to work on Saturday in the factory. Have you learned nothing?" And he said, "Sir, I used to believe like you, but I met my friend Jesus and I want to honor him." And he said, "Continue beating him." So the 2 guys grabbed his arms again and they held him there, and the other 4 guys began just wailing on him with their fists and kicking him with their feet. And this continued for an hour, and finally he said, "Stop." And he went up to Mr. Wong again and he said, "Mr. Wong, are you gonna go to work?" And he said, "I can't. I need to spend today with my friend." And he said, Officer Yen said, "Continue beating him." And Mr. Wong at this point, he says, he just began praying out loud, "Dear God, please be with my family. Please be with my kids." And he became so intent in this conversation that he was having with God that he barely felt the beating. Finally, Officer Yen said, "Enough! Put him on his bedroll and leave him there." And next Sabbath came. Roll call again. Mr. Wong, prisoner Wong. There's no prisoner. Goes back down. There he is sitting there reading from his medical journal, and he says, "Prisoner Wong, are you going to go to work today?" And he says, "No, again, I'm not going to go to work today." And he says, "Same 6 dudes, get down here, hold his arms." And this happens for 6 months, where every single Sabbath, these guys would come down and they would just beat him. And finally, Officer Yen said, "Worship your God." So for a while, things were okay. Now remember I'd said that he was on a detail that was out collecting mushrooms and herbs and things like this. And so as he's out there during the week and he's doing this, he's got his Sabbaths, his food is now okay, everything seems to be picking up, it seems to be okay. And he's got these people coming to him, he's got these people asking still. More and more of them are noticing that he's odd, and they want to know why. And so he's giving out these little toilet paper with Bible verses. And then one day a prisoner by the name of Lee comes up to him. And Lee says, "I want to know what makes you different." So again, same deal. He writes out a Bible verse, he gives it to him. What does he command? What does he tell them to do? Memorize it and do what with it? And then do what? Yes, recite it to me and I'll give you another one. So this happens for a few days. And then one day, again, because prisoners knew that there were certain things they could do to kind of gain favor with the guards. And so a couple days goes by, and Officer Yen comes downstairs with prisoner Lee in tow. And he says, "Prisoner Wong, why have you been giving these toilet paper with Bible verses to prisoner Lee?" And Mr. Wong takes a deep breath. By now, he's been doing this over and over, and he says, "Because he wanted to know about my friends, and I wanted to introduce him to my friends." And he began to feel sad, because he just felt sad for prisoner Lee, that he was willing to give this experience up for some extra favor with the guards. Maybe it would have been some tobacco, or some extra food, or whatever. And Officer Yen at this point is standing there, and he's angry. He's like, "What am I supposed to do with you, prisoner Wong? I can't beat you into submission. What am I supposed to do with you?" And he's standing there and he's pacing back and forth and he's getting angry and he's getting upset, and and that's when prisoner Lee speaks up and says, "I have an idea." Again, going for some extra brownie points here. "I have an idea. I have this knot. I call it the Lee knot. And it is guaranteed that if I tie this knot, no one has ever been able to escape from it. So why don't I tie him up to the post outside and we'll leave him there overnight." Now, I don't know what kind of brownie points he got for that idea, but Officer Yen loved it. So he said, "Let's go." And prisoner Wong was led outside. And he was forced to sit against a post. And prisoner Lee got behind and tied his hands together. Now, here's what I'm not telling you yet. How many of you guys have ever been to Alberta? Yes, when it is minus 38, 40 degrees outside. It's so cold that your nose sticks together as soon as you go outside. I know here in the Maritimes you probably get really cold too. I don't know about you guys, how many of you like winter? Oh, how many of you like summer? I'm just gonna raise my hands. So for those of you that like winter, I don't know, but this experience probably was a little too cold. So it's minus 38 degrees outside. And he's outside, he's up against this post, and his hands are now tied behind his back in this knot that is so tight that even despite the cold, he cannot feel his hands. They're numb instantly, just from the lack of circulation. And as he's standing there, he's thinking to himself, "I'm going to die of hypothermia tonight because I can't move." And then to make things worse, he's figuring maybe, I can kind of just bounce and spot or something. And Officer Yen says to him, "If you so much as move, these guards stationed around you will shoot you dead on the spot. So you have to stand perfectly still all night." And Officer Yen leaves. He's standing there, his back to this post, his hands tied, his feet tied. And he says he begins to pray. And he says, "Dear God, after all I've been through, please don't let it end like this. Please let me be able to witness for you a little further." An hour goes by. For anybody that's ever been outside when it's really cold, you know how you feel after an hour. Imagine being tied to a post. And the guards at this point are also feeling the cold. And so they get up and they go inside. They're technically not supposed to leave their post, but they're looking at him and they're like, he's not going to go anywhere. So they go inside where it's warmer. And he prays again and he's like, "Dear God," standing there, "please don't let it end like this." When suddenly he feels a warm glow behind him and his hands are free. And he looks around and he's like, "Oh my goodness, I'm free." And he looks, and the guards are just busy. He can see them through the makeshift window now. They're busy talking, and so he's like, "Well, I'm going to try to warm up." So he begins to do some jumping jacks, and he does some jumping around, and he runs around the post, and he gets to the point where he actually gets warm, right? And so he sits down for a few minutes, catches his breath, then he continues to do this all night long, running, exercising, jumping jacks, whatever it takes to keep him warm. And then the sun starts to come up. Now remember, there's nowhere that he could run off to. So if you're thinking like, "Oh my goodness, why didn't he just run away?" There's nowhere to go. But the sun is starting to come up and he's thinking to himself, okay, the guards come out and they're going to any minute and they find me untied. They're going to assume somebody in the camp has untied me. They're going to call everybody together. They're going to end up either just shooting people off, and I don't want harm. God, that's not the witness that I want. So he stands up against the post and he says, "Lord, tie me back up, please." And the next thing he knows, he is tied up again. He can't move. The guard comes out, he's standing there, he's got his head down. And the guard comes out expecting to find a frozen man. And Mr. Wong holds his head up and goes, "Good morning." And the guard jumped. Because this dude is supposed to be dead. And there he is, standing there. His cheeks are rosy, he's looking good. And the guard begins to untie him. And Mr. Wong recounts how he started laughing because it took the guard half an hour to untie this knot. And all he could think was that his guardian angel had a sense of humor tying this crazy knot that the guards could barely figure out. And so finally they get this knot untied and they say, "You know what?" They're just amazed at this point. They're like, what? Just come with us. And they bring him into the guardhouse and they have him sit down and they feed him. They let him sit by the fire and warm up. And they left him alone after that. A few more years goes by. I'm just going to conclude the story. A few more years goes by and finally one day he's called in. And they say, "Mr. Wong, we're going to grant you a 1-month pass. You can go home, go back to Shanghai, see your family, but then you have to return." Because remember, how many years was he supposed to be there? 20 years. He goes home, he sees his family. The way he gets home is a miracle in and of itself. He gets home, he sees his family. His kids are grown now. They have kids of their own. And Shanghai is different. China is different. His kids are working now and they're no longer forced to work on Sabbath. And after another month, they apply for him to have an extended month. And he stays for another month. And eventually they end up working and they clear his name. And he's able to share this testimony. And you can actually buy the book now. It's really cool. You can buy it on Amazon or you can buy it at the ABC. It's just called The Man That Couldn't Be Killed. There's a lot more stories in here that I didn't tell. But it's a fantastic true story about a man with incredible commitment to God. Tonight, really quick before I let you guys go, I want to just take a few minutes to look at one other intriguing story about somebody who is so insignificant that she doesn't even have a name. And yet her story is one that is also one full of commitment, that is important because it shows us another character trait that we need in order to be fully committed, and that is humility. So first off, I want us to go to Matthew chapter 18. So if you guys have your phones or your Bibles, or you can look up here, Matthew 18. And as you can see there, verse 2 to 4. And I love this because the disciples at this point are fighting. They're arguing about who is the greatest, who's the best, who's got the best degree, who's got the best clothes, who's got the coolest new phone. And they go up to Jesus and they say, who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? They want to know, how am I to be the greatest? And Jesus points to a little kid. There's a little kid in the back there. My nephew, actually, Rowan. Jesus points to a little kid and he says, truly I tell you, unless you change and you become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And I like to imagine that when Jesus was saying that, he was thinking of this story that we're going to explore here for a few minutes. It's found in 2 Kings chapter 5, and a lot of you know this story very well. We're going to take a look at verse 2 here real quick. It says, now the Arameans on one of their raids had taken a young girl captive from the land of Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. So in order to understand what's happening here, we have to understand that at this time, Israel is at war with the army of the Arameans. And then what they would do is this thing called a flash raid. So people would go out, and while they are, they leave the city in the morning, they'd go out and they'd work in the fields during the day, and then at night they would come back to the city and they would sleep, and then the next day they would continue the same cycle. And so what these armies would do, this army from Aram, they were famous for doing these things called flash raids, where they would just go, they would wait until these people are out in the fields working, and then they would just, boom, show up, they would take people captive, they would kill some, and then they would sell some off as servants. Now, I don't know if this little girl's parents were murdered in front of her eyes. I don't know if maybe they were still inside the city and she just happened to be outside, maybe playing or doing something, who knows, helping. Or if her parents were also taken and sold as slaves, who knows. We're not told. But we are told that she's a young girl. She's taken captive from her homeland. And now she's serving Naaman's wife. Now, I love the way that this story is set up because it is set up to contrast two characters. And so if we go back to verse 1, we see our other main character. The character that we tend to focus on maybe a little bit more so, and that is Naaman. And right away we see he's Naaman. He's got a name. This other girl has no name. She's just the nameless girl. Naaman, he's the commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man, and he was in high favor with his master. Now I want you to contrast those two verses in what you've just heard. Nameless girl, servant girl, and then you've got Naaman, named, commander of the king's army, and he has favor with the king. Now, if we were doing a play here tonight, and we were casting for the play, and I was like, how many of you guys want to be Naaman? You've got kind of a star role in here, other than Elisha. It's a pretty big deal. We'd kind of all be vying for that position, whereas this poor girl, she has one line. One line, that's it. Fairly insignificant. And yet the Bible story it's purposely setting us up to compare and contrast these two characters. This is a man that is mighty. He's a mighty warrior. But it says this. He's suffering from leprosy. He has a problem. He's suffering from a disease that has made him, it's an incurable disease, and a disease that is going to eventually isolate him. Now, as I read this story, the little servant girl enters with her one little line, and she says this. If only my Lord were with the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I was taken from my homeland and my parents were maybe killed or sold off, either way I'm separated from them, and I'm now living with the dude that's responsible for all that, and now I find out that he has leprosy, I think I'd be doing a little bit of a dance. I'd be like, I'm kind of happy. I kind of see God's vengeance here. This is good. God is acting in my favor here. Retribution is just. Vengeance is sweet. But we see something different going on here. We see her come up with her one little line, and she says, if only. She has such a sweet, pure heart. She's like, if only my Lord were with the prophet who's in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. And so the Bible tells us that Naaman goes, and he takes her advice, and he goes and he meets with the king of Aram. And the king of Aram gives him a letter to send to the king of Israel. Now remember, who are the two nations that are fighting here? Israel and Aram, right? So Naaman goes to the king, and right away this is all set up to show the difference that's going on here and what we shouldn't do in contrast to this little servant girl. So first off, we see the king, Israel's king, keep in mind. So Naaman shows up, and he's got 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 sets of garments. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, which read, when this letter reaches you, know that I have sent to you my servant Naaman, that you may cure him of his leprosy. And when the king of Israel reads the letter, he tears his clothes and says, am I God to give death or life, that this man sends word to me to cure a man of his leprosy? Just look and see how he's trying to pick a quarrel with me. So again, we see here the contrast in their characters. We see this king who should know, first off, what's going on in his own country. He should know that there is a man there that can actually help. He should know that God is able to do all things. And yet all he sees is the fact that Naaman is standing before him, and he's worried that Naaman is trying to pick a quarrel with him. They're just trying to start another war. So that's the first thing that we see. Then we see Elisha getting word. He goes and he meets with the king, and he says, send the man to me. And then we see Naaman's character emerge. Naaman comes to Elisha's house, and let's go down to verse 10. Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, go wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean. Okay, cool, we know that part of the story. We've heard it a million times. But Naaman became angry and went away, saying, I thought that for me he would surely come out and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and would wave his hand over the spot and cure the leprosy. And I love that. Because first off, what we see is Naaman's like, dude, I am so important. I'm the commander of the king's army, and the dude can't even come outside to meet me. But aren't we all guilty of that sometimes too? I mean, we all know people that get a little high and mighty, but aren't there times where we do that too? Maybe it's at our jobs. Don't they know that I'm the manager and they're asking me to do such and such, clean the bathrooms? Don't they know that I'm the camp director? Why am I being asked to do this? Don't they know that I have a master's degree or a PhD? Don't they know that, and the list continues, don't they know how wealthy I am? Don't they know how many followers I have on TikTok? We all have a tendency to do that. And then Naaman says, and he just come out and wave his hand over the spot and cure my leprosy. And when I read that, I have to laugh, because I've done that to God before. Where I've actually prayed about something, and I remember asking God, giving him a specific problem, and then telling him how I thought he should answer the prayer. Like, dear God, this is my problem, and I think it'd be really cool if you answered it in this way. So last night, you'll remember, I began telling the story about when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. For me, my go-to was to just be angry with God, to throw my Bible, to have basically a temper tantrum. I was like Naaman. I had a fit of rage, because I thought that God needed to act in a certain way. I was trying to put God into a little box, and God wasn't fitting in that box. And I'm going to tell more of that story tomorrow. So he turns and he goes away in a rage. Now, here is what I want us to pay attention to. In verse 13 it says, but his servants said, "Father, if the prophet had commanded you to do something difficult, would you not have done it? How much more when all he said was to wash and be clean?" And I'm like, again, that hits home with me because there's a lot of times where I get my worth and my value from my work. And Naaman was a bit of a workaholic. And God is trying so hard to teach him, to show him that there's another way. And here is the key to everything that we're studying right now. So he went down and he immersed himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God. His flesh was restored like the flesh of a child, and he was clean. Now what's happening here in the Hebrew language is this. Right away, the Bible has set us up to see the difference between Naaman and this little girl. Throughout the entire story, we are seeing the differences in their characters. And when Naaman goes down into that water, and God does his thing, and Naaman emerges, God has not only done a work to his skin, which is what we often focus on, but in the Hebrew, he has done a work to his heart. And now he emerges like that little child. Guys, in John chapter 3, in closing, in John chapter 3, verse 1, we meet another man who's set up a lot like the Pharisees. Now there was a Pharisee named Nicodemus, a leader of the Jews. It's a big dude. He's got a name, he's got a title, he's important. But he comes to Jesus one night because he has no idea how to be saved. He has no idea how to fully commit. And Jesus sits him down and says, "Unless you're born again." And this dude with all this education, with all of this knowledge, has no idea what Jesus is talking about. And for us here tonight, we may be saying, "I don't get it either. How do I fully commit? How do I become humble like a child?" And what is being said here by Jesus is this. He says, "Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." Remember last night, I said Jeremiah had to look up. He had to realize he couldn't get out of that pit alone. And Jesus says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish, but would have everlasting life." How do we get that new life? How do we get that new start? How do we become like Naaman, where we're this workaholic, self-worth obsessed individual, but we go down into that water and we come up with a heart like a child? Because Jesus says we have to be changed to become like one. We have to look at Jesus. And we're going to talk more about that tomorrow morning. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I just pray that you would help us. It can become so easy to look to ourselves, to look at our titles, to look at who we are, how much money we have or don't have, or all those things, Lord, that we think really assign us worth. When in reality, Lord, you're just asking us to look at you, to put all that stuff aside, and to let you lead and guide. Lord, I just pray that you would humble us, that you would help us daily to seek you and to become more like you. I pray, Lord, that you would be with us tonight. Help us, Lord, to continue to get a clearer picture of who you are. I pray and I ask this in your name. Amen.